project, you will need a knitting loom, yarn that works with the gauge of knitting loom that you have, 2 stitch markers. The stitch markers or peg markers will be used to mark the pegs where you will work your heel from. So simply just slide your stitch marker in this form on the peg and you are ready to go. Now let's get started working our short row heel. For our example, we are going to use a loom with 24 pegs and our heel will take place over 12 pegs. Simply put a stitch marker on the first peg and another stitch marker on the midway point, in this case peg number 12. Now we are ready to begin our heel. Our heel will be created using a technique known as short rows. The technique is known as short rows because all you do is you knit a partial row, and as you keep knitting partial rows you create extra fabric to form a cup shape. This cup shape in our case will be used to fit the heel portion of our foot. The short rows include a technique also known as wrap and turn. Wrapping is when you lift one of the stitches off and then of the peg and you hold it, and with your working yarn you wrap that peg and then you place the stitch back on. And turning simply means to turn in the other direction and knit. To begin, what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit from peg 1 all the way to the peg right before the last one. This is my last peg, so I'm going to knit from peg 1 all the way to the peg before the last one, so peg 11 in this case. So go ahead and knit from peg 1 to the peg before the last one for your heel. I'm using the knit stitch in my example. And I am right now on the peg before the last one, so I knit it. And now you need to create a wrap. To create the wrap, simply take the stitch of the peg that needs the wrap, take it off and hold it with your knitting tool. Now take your working yarn and create a yarn over on that empty peg. A yarn over is simply an E-wrap, so take the yarn and E-wrap the peg. Simply pass the yarn through the back of the peg and put it towards the front. And now place that stitch back on the peg. And now your yarn is towards the front. Your instructions and the heel will probably say something along the lines of wrap the peg and then turn. The turn simply means to turn in the other direction that you came and knit. So let's go ahead and simply knit the other stitches. So we're knitting towards peg 1. So before continuing, I want to show you how that peg that we wrapped looks. You see, that's the stitch at the top, and this is the wrap, and it's going to stay like that. So the peg that we wrapped looks like this. It has the stitch at the top and the wrap at the bottom. So let's continue. Knit all the way towards peg 1, but do not knit the first peg. So again, knit to the peg before the last one. So over here I already knitted the last peg before the last one, and now we need to create the wrap on this peg, the one that has the stitch marker. So simply take the loop off the peg, hold it with your tool, take the working yarn and wrap that peg. The working yarn will end up towards the front of the knitting loom. Place the loop back on the peg, and now knit, turn and knit in the other direction towards peg 12 or towards your middle peg. And now I am at that peg before the last one that's wrapped. How do you know the one that's wrapped? It has 2 loops right now. And now we need to wrap the peg before the last wrapped one. So simply take the loop off again, wrap the peg, place the loop back on. Now turn and knit in the other direction just like we did before, and you will knit until you reach the peg before the last one wrapped. So until this point. And you will continue in this manner, knitting, wrapping that peg, and then you knit back until you reach the peg before the last one that you wrap the next, that adjacent peg, then you turn and you knit in the other direction and wrap that peg, and you continue doing this until you have 1/3 of the pegs that you used to create the heel unworked. In our case, we started with 12 pegs for the heel. We are going to work until we have 4 pegs in the middle unworked. So you will have 4 pegs on your right with wraps and 4 pegs empty, not empty but unworked without wraps, and 4 pegs with wraps on the left. So go ahead and let's get to that point. So I am wrapping the 4th peg on the right side, and now I have 4 pegs wrapped on the right. Now it's wrapped. 4 pegs unworked, 1, 2, 3, 4, meaning with only those 4 pegs will only have the stitch on it. And then on the left I have 4 pegs with wraps. The wrap in the stitch, wrap in the stitch, wrap in the stitch, and wrap in the stitch. So that is the first part of the heel.